Good evening, everybody. Namaste. Welcome to Mumbai Storytellers Society's January session, which is Open House. Ask the Teller, the Storyteller. So today's topic is traditional stories versus personal stories. We have expert panelists here with us. We have Lavanya Srinivas from Chennai. We have Shanty Rose from Doha, Qatar. We have Deepa Kiran from Hyderabad and Rituparna Ghosh from Delhi. They are our panelists and they will talk about the traditional as well as personal stories as they are experienced in that field. And then we will have the session open to the audience. You can raise questions, you can direct your questions to the panelists and they would answer. Or I can direct the questions to the concerned person. Well, as you know, Mumbai Storytellers Society is a registered not-for-profit organization set up 3 years back with the aim to propagate or revive the oral tradition in the community. So we've had an international storytelling festival in 2020, January, which was a great success. And the topic was mythology for the millennials. And hopefully, keeping our fingers crossed, we should have missed in 2022 because we want to have it in the physical form, not on, virtual platform. So stay tuned. You will hear from us. As you know, we have monthly sessions. Next month, we have Katakshari. So it's open to everyone. Stay tuned. You can get our notifications on our Facebook page as well as Instagram. Follow us and you will become aware of our program. Well, today evening, let's get down to the topic in question. Now, what is a traditional story? A traditional story can be described as a first-hand or a first third-person narrative, recounting a story with roots in the oral tradition that the audience believes is fictional and metaphorical. First or third person fiction, not personally experienced, is a traditional story. And how would one define personal storytelling? A personal storytelling is a first-person narrative that the audience believes recounts something that happened, something that's more or less true. First-person nonfiction, personally experienced. Well, I will not go into details. This is just in the broad sense the way I would define traditional stories and personal stories. But there has been cross-pollination between the two. And I'm reminded of a great philosopher who said that with changing times, we need to adapt. So as storytellers, we need to adapt with the changing times. So hope today you get more insights into traditional as well as personal stories. Please keep your videos on because the storyteller, the panelists would like to see you. So please keep yourself muted, but keep your video on. Let me introduce the first panelist for today evening, Lavanya Srinivas. Lavanya Srinivas is a very dear friend. She is from Chennai. She is an expert faculty for narratives and storytelling at the National Institute of Fashion Technology, Chennai campus. She is also the founder and director of Katha Kamamishu, a professional development center for creative educators, story coaches, teachers, and trainers. She is also well known as a communication coach, soft skills trainer, story coach, creative educator, and professional storyteller. Lavanya is also the founder and managing trustee of the Katha Kshetra Trust and also the chairperson of All Ladies League Storytelling Tamil Nadu chapter. Welcome, Lavanya, to Mumbai Storytellers Society's open house. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, Usha. Thank you. Namaste. It's a pleasure to me too. Yeah. So, tha thinna, tha thinna, tha thinna, thin. In the eastern part of India, in Orissa, there lived a tribe which believed that humans had long tails in olden days. They believed that these tales made their lives so beautiful. So they were graceful, but soon times changed. Life became much, much faster. Takita, takita, thum. Takita, takita, thum. There were more people and there was less space on earth. So there was not much space for them to swish and swoosh their tails. They tripped on each other's tails and fell down. Ouch! Ooh! Ow! There were sounds all over the place. At home, in the market space, and wherever, at marriages, wherever they went. And soon, one day, takita, 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 ta, came the King Kitang. This king, the god, they believed, Kitang, was a god. And he had naturally the longest tail. And he went to the market to buy all the stuff that the humans were buying. He was excited. He went to buy and somebody tripped on his tail. And thud, he fell down and broke his teeth. And they fell off. You know, laughter is contagious. Everybody started laughing at the god. Laughing at the god, he got angry. He pulled and pulled and pulled his tail. He picked it up like this and swirled it and threw it away. And you know what happened? After years and years, this tail became the palm tree. And naturally, the people who were watching him were scared, and their tiny tails also fell off by themselves, scared and in fear. They fell off top, top, top. And they became the grass blades, people believed. The Sauras believed that humans had long tails and they dropped it suddenly. So, my dear friends, this is what traditional storytelling is all about. It's about the beliefs and the customs and the traditions of people. You are what you believe. So when I saw in Visakhapatnam the Prince of Dasapalla sweeping the floor in front of Lord Jagannatha's temple, and unless the king swept the road, the Ratha would not move. And then I thought, oh, maybe this is how the Lord is waiting to connect with his people back, with the tales, the small and the huge. So stories are about connection. Man is not just a social animal, he's a storytelling animal as well. We make sense of the world we live in through stories. So, you know now how important traditional stories are. Do I have a little more time, Usha? Or do I?
Yes, if you can wrap it up in 1 minute,
Yes,
Lavanya.
yes. Yeah. So
Sure.
traditional storytelling had this voice modulation, And then they had these instruments, ta, ke, ta, ta, ke, ta, ta, ke, ta, ta. So there were musical instruments, there were beautiful chitra kathas, the visuals. It was always a collaborative effort of caste and clan and communities telling their stories. Mothers told stories to their children about what happened around and about their past and present. And this is what happens when I heard about Darwin's theory. He said that humans had tails, and some people believed scientifically that it shrunk, the tail started shrinking. But a very important sect also believes that the evolution was sudden. Humans' tails just dropped overnight. And this wonderful folk tale connects that scientific base. So I feel, and I strongly feel, that traditional storytelling is a wonderful way of communicating and knowing our past and connecting with our present and looking ahead for our future. Thank you, Usha. And thank you, Mumbai Storytellers, for inviting me here. And this small difference between a story and a narrative, we are going to discuss today, I'm sure, interesting discussions and topics.
Thank you, Lavanya. What a lovely story. Yes, the difference between the narrative and the story. Now, before I invite our next panelist, Shanty Rose from Doha, I would just like to give you a brief history. You know, people have been telling stories since the beginning of time. They've been telling personal as well as traditional stories. But somewhere about 40 years ago in the United States, or maybe 30 years back in the 1990s, Moth was launched in New York, which focused on personal narrative. By the mid 2000s, story slam were proliferating and festivals were experiencing declines in attendance. This set up some conflict between storytellers who leaned towards traditional stories and those who came up with story slam scene or otherwise leaned towards personal stories. There's a lot of grumbling on both sides about relative value. But let's see what the grumble is all about. Let me invite Shanty Rose. Shanty, welcome to Mumbai Storytellers Society's Story Slam. Excuse me, our open house. And Shanty is a qualified communication skills trainer for young adults, has 20 years of collective experience in areas as varied as human resources and public relations, public speaking, and storytelling. Shanty is a certified public speaker from Trinity College London, a certified cognitive behavioral therapist practitioner, and uses this skill as a service. She is a distinguished Toastmaster with Toastmasters International USA and continuing as an ardent Toastmaster for the past 9 years. Shanty is currently living in Doha, Qatar. She is the founder of the online personal storytelling forum called Across and Beyond the Arabian Sea. She started this dream venture last year in June 2021 due to her sheer love for stories and storytelling. Personal storytelling is her niche, and this forum is for bonding with stories that can transcend borders. She hosts personal storytelling sessions on fourth Saturdays of every month with a bunch of proficient storytellers. Welcome, Shanty, to Open House.
Thank you so much, Usha, for that warm introduction. Namaste, everyone. After that spectacular story that Lavanya shared, now I'm going to talk a bit about personal stories. Stories. We all live our stories day in and day out, isn't it? Stories that we tell others and to ourselves. That's how we process the world around and within us and form connections with others and again with ourselves. Yet it is so interesting to see sometimes when we are asked to share our personal experience stories, many of us hesitate due to a host of reasons. First one being modesty. I am an ordinary person living an ordinary life. What do I share? How does it even matter? Or maybe the fear of being judged, criticized, or ridiculed. Or maybe the lack of knowledge in how to express a story in a way that is interesting and meaningful for others. The point is, most of us are drawn to things that we can relate to, things that are real, vulnerability, failures, trials, rather than probably those big victories or triumphs, isn't it? So let's see why we should share our personal stories first. From my experience, I found these reasons. First, connections. Lavanya mentioned that connections, importance of connections in stories. Stories forge connections among people, between people, and ideas. Now, when we share a personal story honestly, we build an effortless rapport with our listeners that can aid build trust, which is a key component for any relationship that is real, meaningful, and long-lasting, the kind of connections we all seek. The second reason could be acceptance. When I choose to share a part of my life through my personal story, that's a sign of an acknowledgement and an acceptance of that part of my life. When this is highly beneficial for the storyteller, it can aid the listener by getting them to reflect on their own life, their own self. The third reason for sharing personal stories is the therapeutic benefit. Now, stories are often recognized for their educational and entertainment value. Personal narratives have huge potential in healing. Now, let me give you an example. One of our storytellers at our forum recently shared a story about her mom, whom she lost a year back. No, it was not a sad story. It was a story full of life and exuberance. She summed it up. She said, I missed my mom, her physical presence in my life, but I know she is breathing inside me, just like I was breathing inside her. Later, during our discussion session, one of the ladies shared, she said, I lost my mom 7 days back. Today, I know that I will be healed and my process starts now. It's hugely therapeutic for the teller and the listener. You are bringing out all sorts of energy related to your personal narrative when you are sharing. Now, the fourth reason that I have is a sense of validation. Now, when somebody is sharing a personal story, that person is sharing the thoughts and the feelings and the emotions that he or she underwent during that certain experience. Now, a listener will have a sense of validation who's undergoing a similar experience or the exact same experience. There, your story has the potential as an inspiration for someone. Maybe someone that's exactly what they needed to hear. So there we have more reasons for sharing our personal stories with others. Back to you, Usha.
Thank you, Shanti. That was very, very well detailed and explained. And I would like to add my two bit here, um, that true stories or personal stories, as against traditional stories, both the stories have value. But today, we live in a voyeuristic society where the selfie matters, where sites like Instagram add to a hunger for personal anecdote. So, we like to post about what we are doing. And also, we all have crummy times, like you said, loss and triumph. Hearing another story at the least reminds us that we are not alone. And also remember, friends, that the story triangle, both these forms of narrative, story and personal narrative, rely on the story triangle. What is the story triangle? The interaction between the teller, the tale, and the audience is very much at play as these stories are performed. Now, I would like to invite Deepa Kiran, our next panelist, who will be talking about traditional stories. Let me introduce Deepa. Deepa Kiran is the founder of Story Arts Foundation. She is an award-winning international storyteller, educationalist, trainer, writer, TEDx speaker. She has authored a children's book titled The Royal Mistake. Deepa has conducted trainings for over 75,000 educators from over 80 countries. Her musical, interactive, multilingual storytelling presentations and workshops are inspired by Indian oral traditions. They are much loved in India and around the world. Welcome, Deepa, to Mumbai Storytellers Society's open house. Over to you.
Thank you. Honored to be here, and it's lovely listening to you and Lavanya and Shanti, and also was just looking up, all those are there on Zoom, and so many familiar faces. Really nice, really nice. Yeah, so I'm here to, give my perspective on traditional stories, and that's what I would call it. My perspective on traditional stories, and for that I'd like to share a little story now. And this is the story of a character whom we are very familiar with, called Krishna. So here is a story of a person in Krishna's life who was a blood relation, Shishupala, someone who had to exist in his life. The story goes that Shishupala had once insulted Krishna, saying, "You cowherd, you don't deserve to be a king." Krishna was so angered, but at that moment, Shishupala's mother sought forgiveness on his behalf to Krishna. And Krishna promised that Shishupala shall be allowed 100 insults a day. And 100 was the limit. If he ever crossed it, Krishna would behead him. It was a long time before a day was to come when 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and Krishna kept track. The 100th insult was given. It was at Yudhishthira's coronation ceremony. Without a second thought, Krishna simply went on to behead Shishupala. As I mulled over this story, I'm taken back 2 years ago when I heard shouts from the apartment next door. "Help, help, help," she was screaming at the top of her voice. My son also came and said, "Mama, we have to do something." Both of us ran out, and as I was running down with my phone, I still remember my fingers were trembling, and I was checking the number of Bharosa Center, of domestic help centers. We rushed out, and the lady was standing outside the house, distraught. The neighbors, we sat her down, and we were there just for solidarity. just to let the husband and the in-laws know that this is not any jungle law. You cannot get away with anything. You cannot get away, certainly, with physical violence. We had heard the abuse, we had heard the insults, and the absolutely derogatory speech of the husband for the last 5 years. And that day, when he raised his hand, she chose not only to step out of the house, she left and never returned. It's been 2 years now. She cut off the husband from her life, beheading him from her life, having given him perhaps even more than 100 chances. For me, this is traditional storytelling. And for me, this is personal stories. Pura Navam Iti, Puranam. Puranam is literally broken down into that which is ancient and that which is ever nascent, ever newborn. And that really is the significance of traditional stories, as I perceive, of not only what the story has, but how it resonates, how it relates to me, my life, today, my context. For after all, finally, whatever times we live in, whatever times we live in, and whichever part of the world we live in, each individual is still having the dilemma in different situations of what to do, what not to do, how not to do, which to choose, which not to choose. The dilemma is universal, and the emotions, the roller coaster of emotions that go behind it is again universal, whatever times we live in. And so I'd just like to end with a story that I'd always heard from my father, which is called Yellam Nanmaikar. It's too long a story, not narrating it here. A lot of you would be familiar with it. Of the minister who always said, Yellam Nanmaikar, everything is for good. That's a story that I learned from my father, and I would tell my children many, many, many times. And a couple of years ago, when for the third time in a row, I cleared the national entrance exam for PhD, I went for the interview, and for the third time, I didn't make it for the PhD. I came back home and I was sitting there, heavy as a rock. And my younger son came up to me, patted my head and said, Amma, yellam nanmaikama, yellam nanmaiku. That for me is truly a reminder of how the traditional and the personal are always interweaving with each other. Thank you so much. Looking forward to listening to the rest of you.
Thank you, Deepa. Thank you so much for that little story narrative. And here I would like to reiterate and quote Darwin. Darwin, in his Origin of Species, says, "It is not the most intellectual of species that survives. It is not the strongest that survives, but the species that survives is the one that is best able to adapt and adjust to the changing environment in which it finds itself." So, as storytellers, I think maybe we are ready to merge the two genres. So, let me go on to my next and the last panelist for today's evening, Rituparna Ghosh from Delhi. Rituparna, welcome to Mumbai Storytellers Society's open house, Ask the Storyteller. Well, Rituparna can be described as a story digger, story charmer, story gatherer, story extractor, story spotter. Rituparna is anything but just a storyteller. An international storyteller and a TEDx speaker, Rituparna is a founder of Your Story Bag, a storytelling, training, and consulting company. She works with listeners, children, adults, organizations, not-for-profits, and corporates, helping them harness the power of stories. A festival curator and performance storyteller, Rituparna has performed at several storytelling festivals across the country and the globe. A former television producer turned storyteller, Rituparna produces two podcasts called Golpo, Stories from Around the World, and What's in Your Story Bag. Rituparna believes that storytelling will be the strongest currency in the world, and she's actively engaged towards making it a sustainable career in India. Let me also add that storytelling is one virus that you can definitely pass around. Rituparna, welcome to Mumbai Storytellers Society.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Usha, and everybody at Mumbai Storytelling Society for having me over. I think I took Usha by a little bit of a surprise when she called me, saying, when she messaged me saying that we'd like to invite you for traditional stories. I said, okay, is it traditional stories versus personal stories? She said, yes. I said, I'll go for personal stories. She said, what? That's what, at least I read her message, interpreted her message like, okay, what? I said, are you sure? I said, yeah, that's it. It's obvious. Why? Because not because of it's in my bio, but because I started storytelling in 2005 because I started off as a journalist, and that's my first job as a storyteller then was to really extract people's stories, to spot a story, to get it out, to craft it, to weave it, and to make it more meaningful for any audience who was listening to that story. So for me, that part of my personality sort of hung on. It's like this cloak, or like this kida, like this virus that you need to, keep making it grow and manifest into something greater. Traditional storytelling came to me much later, until 2014. It's when I dived deep into the whole world of traditional stories of myth, mythology, of your folk and your fable, and of your fairy tale and all of that. So while that happened, personal storytelling was something which was like left on that, and I felt like I'm the smallest atom in this whole universe called storytelling, because there are such great legends and there are so many people who've been telling stories for so many years, and for it's the world's oldest form of communication. There have been such a lot of work which has happened in storytelling. It's a huge space, and I'm just a newbie storyteller. What will I do in this world? And I felt afraid. And then I asked myself that, are you going to be beginning as a storyteller for the first time? I said, no, I've been telling stories since a few years now, but that was different. This is different. And then I was reminded of a story which I had grown up with, a story that my father told me about my grandfather. So I never saw my grandfather because my grandfather passed away when my father was 17. And his passing, he was the third of his three children. It had a big impact on him. And he just passed out from school, so he could not get over the fact that he went to a boarding school. That I went to a boarding school, and when I came back, my father left the year after that, and he couldn't get over that sort of trauma and pain. So he filled my life with a lot of stories about my grandfather, and I think I heard more stories than my brother did, because he too went to a boarding school and I didn't, and I ended up listening to a lot of stories. As I was growing up, a lot of people, including my father and the rest of my family, my father's side of the family, said that I resemble my grandfather. Not because of his looks and mannerisms. I did not look like my grandfather at all. But they say I inherited his gifts. So you see, he was a great orator. He was a writer. He was a poet. He was a playwright. He used to hunt. I'm not a hunter. But the other things, of all his cultural gifts, people said, oh, because you're the only one who's culturally oriented, because I did song and dance, Bharatanatyam, and all kinds of things as a kid. So you're the one who's got it quite obviously. So, you feel nice that because there's something that connects me to my grandfather, who I've never seen, but I'm hearing great stories about his poetry. He used to write erotic poetry, by the way. And I got to know that when I came of age, because my mother told me that, I read his love letters, this beautiful poetry that he wrote for your grandmother and things like that. So that's where I was discovering my grandfather while I was growing up. But this one story about him, which my father told, that came back to me when I started off, is of that night when my grandfather, that moment in his life, when he went to his father, after finishing his medical college, and he was to start a job or become a doctor, start practicing. And his father used to work for this land, a very well-to-do Bengali zamindar, a landlord, who had a lot of money, and he was his family doctor. So he was taken care of. And my grandfather's father said that, don't look here, you don't have to now go and work. You take up my job. I've grown old and this landlord will need another doctor. So why don't you take over my job? And my grandfather said, no, I don't want to. She said, are you crazy? This is pre-independent India we are talking about, okay? So that point of time, sometime in the 30s, I said, no, I'm not going to do that because that's not why I became a doctor. I want to go and serve people who don't have medical facilities, because this is a very young and a turbulent country at this point of time. And there are lots of people who don't even know that a doctor is somebody that they can go to. There are people dying, and I want to go and serve them. And his father said, are you mad? Like, you come and do this, and you will be taken care of. Your generations and generations and generations after you will be looked after. You're a fool. And my grandfather said, I don't care. This is what I want to do. This is what matters to me. And his father said, fine, then you're on your own. And he said, very well, that's what I want to do. I want to be on my own. And he took off. In the middle of the night, he boarded a train and he didn't know where did the train go. And as the train went, the TT came and asked him, do you have a ticket? He said, I don't have a ticket. But I want to go to the last stop, wherever this train stops. And the TT said, okay, fine. And he gave him a ticket. The train reached the next night, middle of the night again, in a little dusty town in Bihar. And my grandfather got off. He walked out of the railway station, saw a rickshaw wala or a chai wala or something like that. And he asked, is there a Bengali family in this town? The town was Lohardaga in Bihar. And that fellow said, yes, there is, you go left, right, up, down, and there is a Mukherjee family that lives here. So my grandfather walked off into the gullies of Lohardaga, trying to find the Mukherjee family. And he knocked on his door and he said, knock, knock, knock. They opened it, stranger in town, said, tell me something, is there a doctor in this town? They said, no, there is no doctor. In fact, when somebody falls ill, we need to go to 2 or 3 villages away, because that's where the hospital is, and that's where if you're lucky, you'll find a doctor. My father said, I am a doctor. I'm new to this town and I want to stay here. Will you give me a place to live? And the Mukherjee family were, of course, very delighted that, oh my God, there's a doctor in our house. He's going to be a paying guest. Very good. He said, okay, come on in. And he lived in their house, and that was his first house in Lohardaga. He went on to live in that town till the rest of his life, and that's where he passed away. He never had a house of his own. And people from all villages came to visit him. He would never take money, could take money only from those who would pay. He would often give money from his own pocket for people's surgeries. Otherwise, they would not get the kind of medical attention that they needed. And that's who he was. Now, as a kid, when I heard the story, it was a great story. It was like, wow, what an adventure. Middle of the night, you get up on a train, you don't know where you're going. And wow, that's amazing. For me, that's what my grandfather was. But the story stayed with me, just like another story you hear about somebody you never met in your family. But years later, when I was at that threshold of my life, deciding, I've left my television career, I can still again go back to it, or take up another communications job in a corporate and do that. And I asked myself, what do you like doing? I like telling stories. Did you learn it? Yes, I did. I did learn how to tell stories, and I'm good at it. Then who did you learn it for? I learned it so that I can tell people stories. That gave me the biggest joy. But being in television, it was all about telling the stories that my editor wanted us to tell, or the news organization wanted to tell. We were at the cusp of the media, where we started off when media was in its nascent, and I saw that fall from grace for television, and that's where it was. And that's where something clicked inside me. I said, I'm scared. I don't know what the world is out there. Will I be able to even create a stir, do anything, forget about be anyone? Will I even be able to get somebody to listen to my story? Like my grandfather, he did not know where he was headed. And that story, this story, gave me a lot of courage. In fact, even now, if I am at a threshold of my life at any point of time, on a bad day, when I don't get when I have a difficult client, or I don't get the kind of proposal, or my proposal doesn't get through for some reason, and I'm like all furious, I ask myself, why did I become a storyteller? And I go back to my grandfather's story, because his story is that rock with me inside. I did not know the influence the story had on me. It's the gift that my father gave me. Today, I have a flag. This is a flag of my grandfather. This is what he had in front of his house, flying. It's a gift. It's a physical reminder of who my grandfather was. It's a pre-independence flag. My mother gave it to my son to keep it. But this flag would mean nothing if not for the story that I have for him. So a story is this magnificent, a personal story is a magnificent gift that's in our lives, in our hands, in our hearts, in our heads, that connects our past to the future, present and the future. Lavanya said something like that, didn't you, Lavanya? Yes, so a personal story is as precious as what it is. It's an heirloom. Today, this is a story. This is an heirloom, like a flag is an heirloom, a physical object which I have in my hand. But more valuable than this, like I said, this would mean nothing if I don't have a story attached to it. The flag doesn't have a story. I asked my father, I asked my bua, they don't remember anything extraordinary about the story. We don't know. I mean, this flag would always be there. That's all, right? But I know it's attached to my grandfather, and I use it. It's the heirloom that I pass on to my son. I'm deeply motivated to tell personal stories, and as a storyteller, trainer, consultant, coach, in all the services and work that I do, we use personal stories, not just in people, in their lives. So I'm running something called 365 Days, 365 Stories. I'm sharing prompts with everyone. If you want to try out personal storytelling, go ahead and find that prompt for the day and find a story from your life. I also teach people how to tell personal stories. And the reason I do that is because it's deeply, deeply, deeply connected to who we are. And it can change the way you look at yourself, your place in the world, and what you and how you navigate your way through this world. So that's where I'll stop. Thank you so much, MSS and Usha, Hema, for inviting me and listening to me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rituparna. That was really enlightening. Reminds me of this, definition of a story. What is it which you give it away and yet get to keep it? And as it travels from place to place, it changes. And without it, there is no meaning or purpose in life. And that's a story. So a personal story is a personal account, which I guess over a period of time you can add to it because it's your story, it's your personal story. While a traditional story gives us vicarious pleasure when we listen to the protagonist or the character in that story. In a personal story, I think there is only one character. Maybe you may have other characters, but in a traditional story, you have many characters, and there are many similarities and differences between the two. But I will rest it here, and I will now invite the audience to please switch on your videos. I just saw that most of your videos are off. Please switch it on, and you can definitely ask your questions. And before you do that, we have received a few questions in the form that you all filled while registering. And I will now request my colleague Hema Subramanian to read out those questions. And Hema, if they have been posed to a particular teller, then you could take that name.
Yeah. But none of these questions have been specifically asked to a particular teller. So what I suggest is we can have all the panelists on the screen, so that I'll just pose a question and then any one of them can answer whether it is a traditional or a personal story. So that would be a better way of handling it, I felt. So I'll just go ahead with the first question. The first question comes from Jyoti Bhatia. would just listen and learn. Okay, sorry. No. Sorry. Anuradha Bhatra. Why are personal stories more relatable than traditional stories, she asks.
Who would you like?
Hema, can we pin all of them on the screen, all the tellers?
Yeah,
Are they already there?
They're already there.
They are,
Shanti
yeah.
has done that. Yeah, Shanti has already done that. She spotlighted everybody and everybody's on the screen. So anyone
answer
else? Yeah. Yes, Rituparna, please go ahead.
So it's not what is more relatable. See, when a listener is listening to a story, whether it's a traditional or a personal, you're always searching for yourself in that story. You want to be a hero of the story that you're hearing, and you're trying to connect the dots and see, is this even relevant to me? Have I experienced this before? And that's the experience, the same experience, whether you're listening to a personal or a traditional. Now, why a personal story perhaps tugs at your heart or makes you sit up a little more is because you know that this person was real. It was not fictional. Yeah. So that's one of the reasons why, this person really lived between us or sometime before us. And why, and between a traditional and a personal, I think the personal, the one who's telling that story will also share the relevance of that story, why that incident, that moment, that memory changed his or her life. So that's why you also learn to walk that or recreate that experience within yourself. And you say such a small thing, but it can create such a deep impact. That's the answer for me.
Okay. Thank you, Rituparna. Anybody would like to add anything to this?
Lavanya wants to say.
Yeah.
I actually appreciate the question very much because it kind of nailed it spot on, because a story is a traditional story is a collective conscience of a civilization or a tribe or a group of people. So it's a collective conscience, whereas a personal story is all about the individual, the character in the stories. It's the personal connect. That is why we are able to, it just kind of hooks, it works as a hook. So, and it also reminds me, I cannot escape being an academic person here. So the story arc is there, where there is a 3-act, and then the character arc. While the traditional storytelling is a story arc or a narrative arc, and the personal story is the character arc. So what the character goes through the story, the transformation. So when you're closely following, as Usha said, the storyteller, the story listener, and the characters merge together and they become one identity. And who helps it? It's the characters, right? I don't want to take more time. I can go on and on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lavanya. Usha, should we move on to this next question?
Sure, please, unless somebody wants to add something to it. I think we can go on to the next one.
Yeah, we'll go on to the next question. So the next question comes from Anagha Prasad. She has asked 2 questions. The first question is, given a general theme, how would you pick between personal and traditional story? Given a general theme, how would you pick between personal and traditional story?
Can I take?
I can answer that, but let's others answer.
Shanti. Given a general theme, and it depends largely on to which audience you are sharing the story. That matters a lot on choosing the story. If you are given a chance to choose a story to tell, so traditional story or personal story, like the experts mentioned here, both has got its own significance. One complements the other. That's what I feel. And also traditional stories we've heard, we've learned, we've grown up with, and personal stories are something that we live through and learn through. We are living through that experience, and it also matters how authentic you are. See, for story, we can add to the story, we can dramatize the story, all that is possible. But I think how earnestly and honestly you are sharing the story, that matters a lot, and the connection happens there. However you try to work around the story. So if, for example, if it is a group of group of people who appreciate more of traditional stories. Understanding the audience is key over here while sharing a story based on a theme, I think.
Okay. Thank
So
you.
may
Yes.
I say here and asking the panelists, then can we merge the two? Because as I believe that today traditional stories are interspersed with personal stories. Maybe you begin with a traditional story and bring the personal element. Like I said, there is a pollination going on. So is that something that we look in the future? We'll be seeing more of this in the future.
Usha, I think that's exactly what Deepa did today. In fact, how she brought out the traditional one and then, merged it into the personal story. She
Yes.
beautifully complemented both those stories, related both those stories.
Thank you, Shanti. And,
Yes.
also, responding to Usha and to the question itself, we are till now we were talking about traditional story versus personal story from a space of the content, right? But really, it's about how you present. I work a lot with yoga and storytelling with children, and where yoga is not just about asanas. Yoga is also about self-reflection, swadhyaya, understanding the self. And it really works even with 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds, where, to give an example, as she asked, if I had a theme of fear, I would tell the story of Krishna and Balarama, where Balarama he's keeping guard for a while, and Krishna's asleep. And Balarama sees this little creature. He says, "Who are you? What are you?" And it grows bigger. Oh, he gets more scared and it grows even bigger. And it's loud and thunderous. It grows to a coconut tree size. And Balarama faints and falls. When Krishna comes, he sees that same creature. Ha ha ha, it's huge and trying to completely intimidate him. And Krishna says, "Yes, what do you want?" And this continues. Krishna keeps questioning till that demon becomes really tiny and small, and Krishna packs it in his dhoti. Later wakes up Balrama and says, "Let's go." And Balrama says, "Oh, that demon, this, that." "Oh, you mean this fellow?" And that's it. Even when you just tell the story to the children, one, they're deeply engaged. It's a traditional story. And we don't even have to talk about the message of the story. They tell you what the story is about, who the demon is, that the demon is fear, and that it's about overcoming and conquering. And they will give you examples if you just urge them a little, of how it connects with their own life. Personal stories will come from them. So I do believe it's the content. It's also the presentation. And like all of us agreed, it's the interconnections and the weaving between all of these that we choose to create.
So then
Can I
Yeah.
add to that and tell you another example which happened in one of my corporate work. So we were talking about how to be a good leader. So this was a workshop for mid-level managers within an organization, and it was a tech organization. And the ask was to prepare them for leadership roles in the near future, and how storytelling is one of the most vital ways to bring a team together, to get them to talk, connect, have a common sense of purpose, and at the same time build individual skills in these managers so that they can be future leaders. So we were doing a vision statement, and we're trying to understand what have they learned from previous leaders that they have met. So while we began there, we wound the whole conversation and our application to telling the story of the Emperor's New Clothes. Now, the Emperor's New Clothes is a fairy tale, right? So a fairy tale, what's the story all about? This is an emperor who wears nothing, and he walks out and everybody says, "Oh, wow, how brilliant you look," right? And the story was about that. What kind of a leader do you want to be? Is this the leader that, everybody has the courage to come up and say that, "Boss, you are naked," or say that, "Boss, you are brilliant at whatever you do," So that got them thinking that what kind of a boss, what will be the stories that I will trigger? So 10 years from now or 5 years from now, what, the way I look up to such and such leader or such and such person, senior in my workspace, do the people who work with me, do they also look up to me? What will they say about me? So you see a traditional story which sort of links it with their personal, and also a future projection. It's not what they are doing today, what will they do in the future? So they are sort of imagining the story, and they have to work and create that persona. They have to work on creating that connection, be an empathetic leader who understands the stories of people. So yeah, that's another example to show that it's already happening.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Rituparna. Sorry, Lavanya, you wanted to add something?
Just a point here, Usha, because I feel whether it's traditional storytelling or personal, there is a context to a story, right? So when you place the characters or the content of the story, the context is what makes it traditional, because it's our past, the values, the festivities, the celebrations, the rituals, the practices of individuals and families are passed on to generations through music, through songs, through poetry, through stories from our parents, from our grandparents, and from our, society. So, and there the music, that's where the folk narratives, traditional storytelling is full of folk narratives, the legends, the itihasas, and as Deepa said, the Puranas, and the Shruti and Smriti. Our learning, everything happened orally initially. And that is why, especially India, with such a multilingual and multicultural, rich narratives, makes it a very, it gives me an opportunity. I'll just go back to the previous question where what I would choose. I might choose a personal story, but the context would be a traditional storytelling. I would pick up a thread from, a folk narrative, folk song, or a bit of a jewelry that I wear that would suit the story. And somewhere in Mahabharata, when I hear Draupadi, asking in Telugu, they say, Nannodi Kannodena, Kannodi Nannodena. In the, quote, she asks about Dharmaraja, whether he lost first with the, the dice game. He lost the game, or he lost the game first, or did he lose me first? Okay, because if he loses me first, if he loses the game, he has no authority over her, and he cannot ask. So these kind of huge questions and existential questions like Sita has, and she asks Rama, I become a part of the story. I become a part of the past. So they are always overlapping, Usha.
Yeah, well said, Lavanya. We have in the audience, I see Vikram Sridhar, Sri Karuna. I also see Poonam Joshi, Mangalam Senthil, and Gitanjali. I know them as storytellers, and I know that Poonam Joshi is part of the Healing Story alliance that you have formed in India. So, where you do a lot of personal stories. So, of course, Hema, you have more questions.
Yes.
We can finish that, and I would
Sure.
ask Vikram or Poonam to.
There's one more question coming up in the chat also. So let us finish the ones that is already here with us. So Anaga Prasad had one more question to ask. From your experience, which audience, adults or children, enjoy and connect to personal stories? It's a very it's a good question.
It's indeed a good question. I work with children, and my storytelling forum is for adults. Children react very well with personal stories too, especially these days. I'm talking about the kids these days, in the pandemic era, in the online classrooms, and all of that happening around. So they really enjoy personal stories. I heard a 4-year-old saying, it's kind of in her head, it is a story. She's saying, I am attending online classes. I don't like to write. My mom tells me, you write, you remember. My teacher says, you write, you remember. I do not like to write. I sit in front of the TV. I like to watch TV. This is what I like. She has never seen a school in her life in the physical context. She's always, attending whatever classes at home. So this is her story, just 4 or 5 lines. She says her point is she does not like to write. Now, children they react really well when we consider them as individuals, when we are sharing personal stories. It's, as parents or as grown-ups, if we are trying to tell the stories in that perspective, like considering them as kids, their reaction might not be that well. If we are considering them as individuals and share our stories as authentic as possible to them as well, they will receive it very well.
Yeah, true that. And I think, as children, when we listen to a lot of stories from our grandparents, most of them are personal stories. I think we've all grown up listening to that, as Rituparna rightly shared a story from her childhood. So I think all of us have grown up with that. I think every age is good.
The one story which children do not like listening to is जब हम छोटे थे तब हमारे time पे हम ये करते थे तो तुम भी ये करो. That's the kind of story parents, adults, teachers should not tell the children. That's I want to just tell people, do not compare your life with your child's life, because the world has changed so rapidly. So it's unfair to put that story.
Right.
As the mother of 2 teenage boys, I would say those kind of stories is like great material for memes.
I know. Yes. So you are going to be the talking. Your children will make a joke out of you. They will, stay away from that. They hate it.
I just have a small point here. Yes, we do have to share those stories, but it's what stories do we share? For instance, every time we tell a story of maybe Krishnashtami or any festival or anything, when I start off as when I was a kid, I used to go to temples or something like that. Or when we tell stories about their father, their mother, and their childhood. And I completely forgot when we make fool of ourselves, and I forgot about it completely. It's just like you, I was. These kind of small phrases that come in between, as Rituparna rightly said, be mindful of what you are telling them. Yeah, which they wouldn't like to listen, but which they might connect again and enjoy. They would laugh. And these are the things that, as I said.
So I totally agree with you, Lavanya, and there slightly I disagree with you, Rituparna, because it's how you connect. Okay, connection is the key word here. How do you contemporize, or how do you bring it down to the level of today's generation, and so that it resonates? So that is the skill. If you're a storyteller, you would have developed that skill, because a storyteller can get away with anything.
Yes.
So
no, I also think that as storytellers, we can also become very didactic and preachy. So that's what I'm trying to take away the onus of that story, to tell that this is what you should be doing. Even, and we can do that with even a traditional story. The moral of the story is this, and you feed it to a child, the child will not take it. So it's pretty much like that. If you tell a traditional story, this is what I had done and this is what you should do, is not what matters. I went to I was in a residency for a school in Himachal, and I was going to do a different kind of a story with the grade 7th and 8th, but the school said, can you do counseling with them? Because adolescent, they are now in that stage where they are all interested in girls and boys, no studying or whatever, the pressures of growing up. Can you do a storytelling on just don't do storytelling, do counseling. I said, I'm not a trained counselor, I cannot do all of this, but I can tell a story. So I told my story of growing up, of the pressures in my life, and I just said, I completely empathize. You are in a tougher time. You have a phone, you have a smartphone in your life, your conversations are recorded, your things are like. So what it just did is that the empathy that you connect, because you still say that I come from a different normal, like the dinosaur age, but my pressures of growing up was still the same. I still have it, but you have far more challenges than what I had. So yes, I do contextualize, but we don't be preachy. That's the thing.
No, I agree with you. I just wanted to say the key word is informed choice. Whether you tell a traditional story or a personal story, the audience makes an informed choice. So you're not didactic, you're not preaching, and you're not telling them that this is what you should do. I think so. You leave it to the intelligence of the audience to make an informed choice. And that's what we aim to, right? With whatever stories we tell. Thank you.
Yes, and there are more interesting questions still
Okay, go
waiting for
ahead.
us. Yeah. So, okay, the next one asked by Pratibha is kind of, we have answered this a little bit. There's a connect already there, but I'll just again ask the question in case you have anything more to add to that. Aren't the personal stories derived from the gist of traditional stories or from the essence conveyed in these stories?
Spoke about it.
So we have already spoken about it a little bit. So anybody would like to add something to that and add some light?
I would
Yeah,
like to
yeah,
add a
Shanti.
little
Yeah,
bit to that.
yes.
I agree to that. A lot of things, a lot of the essence that we've learned from the stories that those are passed on to us,
Hmm.
we've heard growing up. Now, there are some real feelings, probably not the black and white, the grayer part of life, or the nuances of our emotions and feelings, why we feel something that we actually feel or do. See, that reminds me, one of my friend who's working in Mumbai, they adopted a rural village with a few of them, an underprivileged village where education facilities are not there for kids, and there are so many other issues. So they collectively are doing so many things for that village. So she came and shared that story at our forum. Now, we all like to be charitable, and generosity is like something, we would like to take away from that. That story is of glory. What she shared was the exasperation they had. They knew that people needed help, and especially the youngsters who had no education. One typical example she took, and this boy was of 23 years. They arranged him a job at a manufacturing unit 100 kilometers away. So he had to stay there and work. And he did not want to work actually. But then they, kind of made him understand that you need to work and all that. Then he needed some money for, going there, his travel, his stay there, all of that. They gave him 3,000 rupees. And after 2 weeks, when she went back, this boy in a very different appearance with colored hair and in a funky look came smiling shyly towards her. She asked, "What are you doing here?" He said, "No, wahan pe mujhe jamta nahi hai." Like, the place where they arranged him a job is, he's not liking that job. It's so much hard work for him. And so the money might as well he utilized for coloring the hair and little other things. What she was trying to tell was, she felt the exasperation that she felt. They had all the right means and all the good intentions of doing all that, what they were doing. But then she said, these are the learnings that they had while they are trying to do something. The hurdles that they face, it's sometimes heartbreaking. It sometimes, keeps you so much down. So this story resonates with so many people. It's not always what we think they need is not what they actually need, or it's not what they actually think. So these nuances or the feelings, some feelings, that why we feel how we feel, so those things comes in real personal stories that you live through, that you actually live through. And when you are trying to share it in all honesty with all the details, so those things can, I think, connect and teach probably people without being preachy.
Thank you, Shanti. I think I'll just go on to the next question. It's asked by Parul Wag. See, one of the things that she's asked is, please share examples of traditional stories that can be used to address issues like safety of children, alcoholic parents, loneliness, domestic violence, etc. So I think this would be list of traditional stories that you would like to know, Parul. Is that something that you'd like to know? Parul, you're there in the
Few
audience.
examples would do.
Yeah.
Few examples.
Okay. So, would anybody like to address this?
I'd like to say that more than a concept or an issue itself, the traditional stories can just offer you. I'll go back to Shanti and Usha. it can offer you what are the resonances that happen in these different contexts. There's shame, there's guilt, there's confusion, and just episodes, different episodes. For example, Indra was the king of the gods, but he did such shameful acts with women that he would be cursed to have 1,000 yonis, 1,000 vaginas on his body, and he would hide from everybody. So the whole layering and dilemma of being efficient in something and also failing. This can fit into 2, 3 different contexts of situations, of concerns in our life. Right? Similarly, there are many other stories that would offer resonances of the seed of truth for our different emotional situations and ethical dilemmas, and at least help trigger a conversation, if not anything else. That's the approach I have found is quite interesting and effective, rather than actually just pick and or force fit it into, because like it goes that each person receives a story differently, and they process it differently according to their life, their context, their wisdom. So it's just so much that you can predict. It's rather it's a workable. I would urge you to consider that. Look at stories of what happens in these situations to different people and offering tools for processing and responding.
Thank you, Deepa. Parul, if I may add to your story, the story about loneliness, a traditional story, you can find it in A.K. Ramanujam's Flowering Tree, telling it to the walls. This is a story about a woman who's so lonely. Nobody spends time with her. So I won't go into the detail. And your thing about alcoholism, you can definitely research about Soma. Soma is the Indian god of wine. And if you go to the Greek myth about Bacchus, and also the Roman counterpart of Bacchus, that will talk to you about alcoholism. So definitely traditional stories, each story can be linked to a traditional story. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The examples that you have given me, I will definitely research into that. For adults, they can be, especially the Indra story, can be taken for adults. But for children who are facing such, issues at home, so for them, I was wondering, will the examples that you gave apply to children as well?
It's how you adapt the story, Parul. Again, it's adaptation. And this is top of the hat. But if you sit down, and I'm sure there are many stories. Lavanya, you wanted to add something?
Yes, Usha, I feel here we need to talk to children about the hero and the anti-hero. For instance, if you take Ramayana, Rama and Ravana are almost equal. Ravana was a great Veena player. He was a wonderful Shiva Bhakta, and he was wonderfully singing. He has all the best qualities. Just one small, error. Somewhere something goes wrong. A passion, a belief, a wrong intention, or something that is actually the crucial factor. Otherwise, all of them and all the stories are equally good and strong, whether they are, heroes or anti-heroes. But it is the intention, it is one small shortcoming that the character has. So we can tell the children, you try to identify, like they themselves indirectly, you tell them, everybody is made of such good things, but there is something small that was, because Hitler was also a wonderful leader, as wonderful as Gandhiji, but then the intention and the result, the purpose. So if we just talk to these things about the children, every story can become an example of whatever you was asking.
Thank you. I think the rest, following few questions have been answered in one way or the other. So I'm jumping on to a question from Ramya. And she asks, I understand that traditional stories have a lot of motifs and symbols in them. How do you bring these elements in personal stories? Well, that was the question. There are a lot of motifs and symbols. How do you get it into personal stories?
Ramya, if you're there, you mean to say the same story to be adapted, or in a personal story to get motifs and symbols? Because in construction of a personal story, I would leave it to Rituparna Shanti to answer whether there are motives in that. Because traditional stories, maybe Deepa can take it.
So one way to answer that is just because traditional stories have motifs and symbols, personal stories also need to have it. It doesn't work like that. It's not like isme hai to isme bhi chahiye, that kind of a thing to equate it. But yes, anything can be a motif, anything can be a symbol if you find that relevance in it. Yeah, and that's why a personal story is that. Now, while we've been talking a lot about personal stories and we're talking about our own personal stories, I'd also like to bring in that a personal story is always shared because it has a context, it has a relevance, it has a meaning, and it has a purpose of its own. It's like saying that if you're sitting over your dining table, you're still saying aaj din mein kya kiya, right? And you're sort of sharing anecdotes and you say this is what this happened, that's happened. Do all of these stories become stories that you will tell the world? Perhaps you're using them just for a roundup on your dinner table to share with your family what did you do in the day. But some of these stories become moving stories to highlight, to underline, to convey some deeper meaning or a relevance of what you are doing to some particular audience. That's where the motive comes in. Right? Now, my grandfather's story is one such story. If you go to my Instagram page today, you will see another story about a medal that I won. And that medal has a story of its own. It's a symbol, and a medal by itself is a symbol, if you were to look at it. So what is that symbol? How is it connected to a personal story? How is it even used for someone else in another context? Is what a personal story is. It changes shape. It's not the same thing. It's also interpreted by the listener or the audience it is meant for. Yeah, so two things. One is that. One thing I don't think Shanti brought it in, or even neither did I, about personal storytelling is, unlike a traditional story, you can take it, form it your own, interpret it yourself, and tell it to the world. A personal story is deeply personal. So there are some ethics to telling a personal tale. So like my grandfather's story is my grandfather's story because it was given to me. Right. And I've spoken to my father about sharing it. I have it on my podcast, and I've got two podcasts. One is a personal story podcast. The other one is a traditional story podcast. And therefore, I haven't brought them differently. So I do have my father's permission to keep telling this story over and over again. Right. Similarly, it does not, like if you heard Deepa tell a story, or the story that Lavanya said, you may have told that story, you may have read that story, you may also go ahead and tell that story again. But the ethics or the rules of personal storytelling are that you hear it, you take it in, and it stays with you. You cannot retell my grandfather's story saying that Rituparna's grandfather had this story, or I heard this in a show and I want. So, that's something which we did not do. Even as a journalist, as a story extractor and a story digger, I give a lot of value to people's personal ownership of that story. Just because they shared it with me, I cannot go and share it with somebody else. So that's something which we did not highlight, and I thought I'll say that.
Ritu, you have actually paved the way for the next open house, which is ethics in storytelling. That is something, yes, since you did not, there is ethic. So in a personal story, the ethics is very strong. I can't take your story. A traditional story, you can share that story. Traditional stories, folk tales especially, are meant to be shared, So that is another open house altogether. Thank you for kind of setting the thing. And we would like to remind you that we have a link to our feedback form. It's in the chat box. We will refresh it again. Please do leave your feedback with us so that we know what kind of topic we can come up with next time. Hema, any more questions?
Sorry.
Yeah.
I just want to quickly respond to that question about symbols and traditional and personal. Coming from a space of being a student of literature and working with various cinema stories. Yes, so I'm reminded of two examples. One is the film Chocolat. If any of you have seen it, look it up. It's the metaphor that goes all through is about cocoa. How cocoa was a healing. Cocoa was considered a healing element in a tribe. They don't tell you the details of the tribe, but it's a tribe somewhere. And a man discovers it, with his wife, it travels. And then we have the story of the daughter who again carries on the work with, she becomes a chocolatier in a small town, and she just knows what's the right flavor to give home. And it starts healing people, it starts changing people. You also find along the way that parallelly, where she is, the town that she's gone to, chocolate is sort of a metaphor for the vices in life, right? So they've really taken, the metaphor of chocolate for a tribe and placed it in a contemporary context, in a very different socio-cultural context. So that's an interesting play of symbols. Another one is the film KD, if any of you've seen it. It's called KD, short form for Karuppudurai. It's a Tamil film. Very, very beautifully set in the storytelling craft of Tamil Nadu. And one of the scenes is where a person goes to this old man to tell him that he has to hand over the child. And we know that the old man doesn't want to do that. So all we see is the person is going and, telling the old man that we need to sit down and speak. And the next shot we see is that in the village, there is a theater performance happening. And in the theater performance, there is one mythological character telling another, how can you ask me for my life? And how can I give it away to you? And then we are back to the, the conversation between the old man. And they don't tell us that he has refused, but you just know it because of the traditional story that spoke for the old man. So there can be very interesting ways of bringing in the symbols, which basically we remember that the seed of the truth resonates from here to here, and we can find ways to think.
Thank you, Deepa. Thank you. Hema, do we have
one last
questions?
question which just looks very interesting and something different than what we have already spoken, is that how to conclude an open-ended personal story as compared to traditional stories which have proper ending. This is something that was a little different from the ones that we have already asked. And there's one more question in the chat which Asha Sampath has asked, that we'll come to that after this. So right now the question is how to conclude an open-ended personal story as compared to traditional stories which have a proper ending. Yes, Shanti.
First of all, a personal story, it is mentioned there, it is an open-ended story. A personal story need not have to have an ending with a moral or a lesson or anything of that sort. It can be open-ended. It's your personal experience. You are sharing it with others.
That after this. So right now the question is how to conclude an open.
Sorry, we were overlapped. Shanti, continue.
Yes. So the story, you can leave the story there. Once you share your personal story, it is up to the listeners how they perceive the story. So you can mention after sharing your story that this is the story that I wanted to share, and it need not have to have an ending with an ending that we like to teach or preach or things like that.
I think Ritu had something to add to it. Rituparna?
So personal storytelling is now a very vital superpower tool for corporates, for entrepreneurs, for businesses, even not-for-profits. So in that area of work or in that industry, I agree with what Shanti says. So the kind of storytelling circles that Shanti runs, and there are personal stories, like even the Moth, for example, will come and they will tell a real life story and just leave it at that. So the listeners are encouraged to interpret it. And because you mentioned the Moth, which I'm a big fan of, I would also like you to go up and look up StoryCorps, which actually archives people's narratives in the US, and it's in the Library of Congress. The stories are archived there, people's histories are archived, and it lets anyone just have a conversation and say, do you remember that time that we were living there and this was our life like? So people are just having conversations and they're documenting their personal stories. So those stories don't have like a definite ending. It's like two people talking and just documenting that part of their life. So yes, I agree with what Shanti says, but there is also the application of storytelling for personal branding, for thought leadership, for communication, for strategy, for leadership. and even for pitching for entrepreneurs and businesses. So when we look at it from that realm, every story that you tell, whether it's a traditional or a personal, very rarely are traditional stories told, because a lot of these folks want to tell real life lived examples, so non-fiction type storytelling. And those stories have to, they mostly 99.9% serve a strategic purpose, because you don't have time, you don't want to waste time to get people to think. Sometimes you may use an open-ended story to get people to warm up, to get their story brains fired and things like that. But within a context, most of them, they are used with a strategic purpose. So, and there is a reason why they want to lead the listener to think and articulate their thoughts, not to govern. Yes, it's still open-ended, like it's not didactic and all of that, but it is still used to highlight something which the leader wants or the teller wants to communicate.
Yeah. So you mean to say it doesn't have to end like, and so they lived happily ever after?
No,
and,
no.
Oh, that was a wonderful tale, you know. Okay. Yes, Lavanya, but I would like to take the last question from Asha, and then we will end the session. Go ahead.
Because the traditional story, as you rightly said, ends with a proper ending, whereas a personal story is slice of life. Yeah. So the end, as Rituparna said, it's very powerful. Therefore, it needs to be impactful. So it's not how you end the story, but how you present it. So end it with a powerful sentence from a quote kind of thing, or something borrowing from the traditional story, a character's, something, what goes on in the mind, or pick up some powerful lines and end it with that. So in a slice of life and personal stories, it is how you end a story rather than what's happening in the story. Yeah. And people are waiting. It's a different audience totally. So the audience decides, like they are looking for an impact, and we know as storytellers, we can feel what they want, and and the stories give us the power to say the right things in the right way. Yeah, Deepa, you were trying to say.
No, I'm just reminded of an example listening to all of you. Which was when I was conducting a teacher training. Usually within the first 1 hour, I know the teachers open up. And there was a school where it was already 1.5, 2 hours, and they were still a little held back, And I told them, I said, listen, there's only one life, yeah, just do things, just do what you feel like, and just use this day as a gift for yourself. And they were listening like that. And then I said, I'm a single mother, I'm a divorcee, and it's not easy in India to be like this. So I get these calls from my mother where she said, Atte ipdi sonnadi, chitti apdi sonnadi, about all the gossip from the relatives. And I said, I tell my mom, those who don't pay my bills, mama, I don't care what they think. And there was an instant rise in the energy in that whole 150 teachers. The rest of the day was a blast. So yes, just responding to all of them is the example that came to my mind, that if we know the intent, the context, and the consequence, and the outcome intended, then it's just a slice of life, it's just a bit, it would fit in. And if not, it needs a closure. Accordingly, we can play around. Yeah.
Well said, Deepa. Hema, can we take the last question?
Yes,
Because
and that is kind of connected to what Deepa has already spoken just now, but it's framed in a different way, but it will connect to the whole thing. Asha Sampath asks, where the traditional story differs from personal story is that the element of fantasy, magic is missing in personal stories. In that sense, the charm of traditional story is missing in personal stories, is what is the statement that she has given, and would like to have a discussion on that.
Yes, so that is a statement. She is not asked a question. So let us rest it there, because let's not make it divisive. Personal stories and traditional stories can coexist, can definitely merge, like Deepa said when she's doing a storytelling workshop. When you see the faces, which are kind of, there is no spirit, but then she says there's just one life, and she tells a little anecdote about her personal life, which uplifts the whole energy level of that classroom or the workshop, then that definitely works. Whatever works is what. So I think The way forward is to merge, to cross-pollinate the two, use personal stories and traditional stories, intersperse it, and then beautifully blend it. And that is, of course, to be crafted. So I would say I would like to thank you all panelists for this wonderful evening and the wonderful audience for asking such insightful questions. I thank Hema as well as Shalini Bajaj, my colleagues in Mumbai Storytellers Society. And as we end, a last word from each of the panelists. Just one sentence to end your, the evening. So let me start with Rituparna.
If you're looking for personal stories, come to me. I love listening to stories, and I can help you tell yours. That's all.
Thank you, Ritu. Okay, Deepa.
I'm satiated and fired with all the new learning, and I'm just feeling bad that I didn't get to hear all of you who have come here with your fantastic questions. I'm sure you have great insights. Yeah.
Thank you, Shanti.
Let's live and share our stories. Just let's do that. And both this complement each other. Just live and share our stories. Thank you, all of you.
Well said, Shanti. Lavanya.
Story matters. Share it. Together we can change the world. Thank you.
Together we can change the world. So let's adapt to the change. So we thank you, Asha. So nice to see you. Poonam, lovely to see you. Vikram had to leave. I think there were good friends out there in the audience, some of the storytellers that I know. But there are many of you that I do not. And thank you, Aarti, for joining from Doha. And wonderful, wonderful. So have a great evening, guys. And we will have the next open house. I think once in 2 months or 3 months, my team will decide. Because I always put my foot in. But we'll await your feedback form. We would like to know. And thank you once again, the panelists, Rituparna, Lavanya Srinivas, Deepa Kiran, and Shanti for accepting our invitation and so beautifully talking about the subject. Thank you for a wonderful, wonderful evening.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Usha.
Thank you so
thoroughly
much,
enjoyed.
Usha and MSS, the whole team.
Great meeting everybody.
Thank you. Very
so much.
nicely put together by all of you. Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Asha, Srikarma, everyone.
Yes.
An energizing platform. Yeah.